Oh, yawn. Big yawn for a little puppy.
Yeah.
My heart.
Tiny little baby.
Oh,
She probably can't see the screen. Hello and welcome to the Drunkduck QUACKCAST. I'm Ozone Ocean and with me is Tanserine.
Hello.
And Pitface.
Hello.
And we are, well, I'm Ozone Ocean, the heroic Ozone Ocean. So we're all adventure heroes going to the exotic, mysterious lands in search of wonderful treasures.
Yes.
That
belong in museums and stuff.
Yes. But really we'll find ourselves, as you do on these great big adventure things that happen to adventure heroes. So we're talking about adventure heroes, retro adventure heroes, I've got to say. And that will be the topic because they're cool and I freaking love retro adventure heroes. There's just not enough of them. It needs to be a fad that comes back. But before we get into that, I've got to bring up the featured comic. QUACKCAST gave us Cavston. So, Quai, tell us about Cavston.
Hello, this is QUACKCAST, and the feature I've selected for this week is Caveston by Caveston, and it is rated T for teen. Breaking news. A voice under the radio static announces, 2 children went missing this early evening after leaving the main square. Parents are advised to keep their children at home until more information is available. The radio signal fades before returning back to the normal schedule. The night before Alan's birthday also means the 1-year anniversary since a mysterious disappearance on Halloween, as well as the perfect opportunity to sneak out the back window to meet up with a trusted friend, Gritty. The two walk around the dreary sidewalks at night while dark shadows and flashing eyes sneak up behind them. A very sinister visitor is waiting and lurking, as a terrified voice blares, "Don't cover your ears." The art is fully drawn and painted digitally. The colors are vivid and bright, with great attention to background details. Professional lettering and text bubbles. Sneak out without getting caught and read Caveston by Caveston, rated T.
And that was Caveston, which is a great little comic that QUACKCAST brought to us, to our attention. Okay, so next up we're going to talk about the featured music. The featured music this week was the theme to Caveston. Oh, geez. So we're talking about this twice. That's because Gun Wallace is inspired. So this music, its authoritative violin pronounces and directs a 4-stringed general deciding the course of action, laying out the battle plan. Electric guitar listens well and leads the squad on a furious audio assault, storming forth and prevailing in a mighty show of shock and awe. So take it away, Gun Wallace, with the theme to Caveston, rated T. was a theme to Caveston, which is a great little comic by a person called Caveston, and it's rated.
Sorry.
Tance did not make that sound. That sound was made by little puppies that Tance has. In case you're wondering. If Tance like drops something on her foot or something like that. No, it's not a human noise. So we're talking about retro adventure heroes, specifically typified by the very famous Indiana Jones, who came about in the Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. So it's an early 80s film, like I can't remember, like 1981 or something like this. So buoyed by the great success of Star Wars and Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg got together to give us the retro adventure hero story of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, one of those ones. So they got together, they gave us that retro adventure story, which was so cool. It's a pastiche of a lot of other adventure heroes, specifically Alan Quatermain, who was I think Edgar Rice Burroughs character, I'm not sure. One of those old authors, who was like a pulp adventure character who would go to exotic places, like South America, and he'd go and find the gold cities and all this kind of stuff, and lost civilizations. So that was really, really popular back in the day, gotta go to Lost World and see dinosaurs or something, I don't know. Cool stories about people going to exotic locations, being self-sufficient, finding like amazing treasures and bringing them back. But there were so many other characters, like there's El Barak, which was a famous one by Robert Howard, the author of Conan and many other stories. That was a guy who did his adventure heroing out in the Middle East. He was an American character who became really good with the Arab people and the Turks and all this, and dressed like the Arabs, and he was sort of doing like a Lawrence of Arabia kind of thing, so he was a pretty cool character. Bulldog Drummond, that was a famous British character from the 1920s. He was an insurance investigator, turned detective, and then he turned adventure hero, and he did adventure heroing kind of stuff. And eventually he got revived in the 1970s in a terrible film that was meant to be sort of like a pastiche of James Bond, but sexy in the 1970s, 1960s mod kind of way, and that eventually turned into the parody Austin Powers. So there's a weird kind of path that poor old Bulldog Drummond took, and he is now in public domain, so you can make your own Bulldog Drummond stories. So that's a kind of interesting thing. You can do your own Bulldog Drummond. So Steve Canyon, he's an adventure hero character who used to fly, I think, B-17s or maybe B-25s or something like this. These American propeller bomber planes. Let's see. So those are... Oh, Biggles. Biggles is another famous one. So he started out as a World War I fighter pilot, ace. So he used to fly the like Suffolk camels and things, biplanes. And then he sort of became an adventure hero sort of after that, and did sort of adventure heroing stuff. There's some really cool books about Biggles. But then we kind of like, we're into the, like, we're not in the 1920s anymore, we're not in the 30s, we're not in the boys' own adventure stories where these characters kind of originated. We are now in the present day. But all throughout like the intervening years between then and now, there have been like characters who have revived these characters, retro adventure heroes. So we're looking at Brendan Fraser's character in The Mummy. Can't remember what he's called, but he's so cool, and I love that movie. I think most people love that movie. It's such a cool kind of version of an adventure hero, and very classic. He has got the look down pat, the personality down pat. He's one of these things about these adventure heroes. I really don't know about adventure heroes in many different cultures. I know specifically about the American and the British. And they do unfortunately have a bit of the colonialist, white, kind of imperialist kind of tinge to them. Even though often adventure heroes will respect, retro adventure heroes will have some kind of respect for a local culture. It'll tend to be of like, oh, me, the superior white character, I respect you. You know, I am an envoy from my race, and I respect your race, like they're doing them a favor. So unfortunately, there is a bit of that. They don't really respect the characters on equal terms so much. They almost do, and I think they're an important step in literature in like white characters respecting other cultures. They're like a transitional step, but they still come from a position of superiority. So there is that. So they're not totally negative. They're a transitional step, but they're not completely on the same level dealing with them as proper equals. Because one of the important traits of these retro adventure heroes, they are like astronauts. They're coming from this established civilization where everything is fine and mundane and normal, and they're going out into the unknown, and they are the representative of their culture going to the weird, dark, bizarre, mysterious places. And this is why retro adventure heroes work, because they are like us going to somewhere unusual and finding it out for us. So that's
us as in like members of Western Europeanish cultures. So that's so like it was these are stories that were obviously made for people like us who are from a particular culture. So it works for us as the intended audience, in that the whatever is meant to be alien comes across as alien, right?
Exactly.
But if you were to flip it from the outside, that then wouldn't work. So
precisely, yeah, it'd be totally weird. It doesn't work from the other way. It only works from the perspective of the culture that it's coming from, or a similar culture. You know, that's why the American adventure heroes work, equally well for British audience, Australian audience, like Italian audience, I imagine, like Spanish audience or whatever, because they come from this Western civilization going out and looking at what's out there. Corto Maltese, there's one that's I think the guy is Italian, Hugo Pratt. He's the author. He has a very British name, but he's not British at all. He's a Portuguese sailor who goes and visits these exotic cultures and things like this, and this is straight. They try and deal with these civilizations on equal terms, but it's not quite. It's like the adventure hero deals with the foreign civilization, or like the tribespeople or whatever, in a more equal and friendly terms than the enemy character, their nemesis, who will treat them as being below them, or treat them as being like either slaves or like inferior. Whereas the adventure hero will try and treat them as noble savages, something like this. At least in the traditional versions. In the more modern versions, I'm sure we'll have some more enlightened interactions. But yeah, the traditional ones tended to be a bit.
Usually, the idea is that the civilization you are going to is alien. Sorry. I'll try to be quick.
You don't mind the sound of the yipping puppies, Tance? It's lovely.
Yeah. There are, like, I have been looking up now. There are some movies, Chinese made, where Jackie Chan is starring before he transitioned to Hollywood, and the quest that the hero has in like completely the same format is to Europe, and not in Africa or Asia or anywhere where they find it more familiar to them. So they go to Europe to find treasure that is guarded by monks and Templars and all sorts of weirdo Europeans of different times, and they have to deal with them and so on and so forth. So that works, pretty much in the same way for other cultures as well. So yeah, that is
That's
the
pretty
format.
cool. Well, now that you say that, I just bring to my mind Around the World in 80 Days. So there's the original story by Jules Verne, and that's like a French adventure hero. He's going off. He's not really like a martial kind of character. Well, I mean, he's not really an explorer so much as someone who's like an adventuring tourist. But he does the adventure hero stuff, and he's got Passepartout with him. But in, I think, 2005, something like 2004, there was this really silly movie with Jackie Chan being like the main star, and Jackie Chan plays Passepartout. And the Phileas Fogg was played by Steve Coogan. There was a lot of other, actors, like there's Arnold Schwarzenegger in there playing some kind of side character, and I think he was a governor at the time. There's many other Owen Wilson's in it with his brother Luke Wilson. Many people. But yeah, Jackie Chan, he's the hero in the story because this was made for the Chinese market, and he's like doing the adventure hero stuff because it's more told from his perspective because he was the biggest star than it is from Phileas Fogg's perspective. So he's, like you were saying, going to Europe and going to all these exotic places and having that kind of adventure experience. And that is a really good version. It's a really silly, crazy version of Around the World in 80 Days. But it's a fun version. It's not intelligent, but it's fun. So, yeah, it's a good point, Hans, about Chinese heroes going off. Yeah, that's
and we even have it in like science fiction form, not only with Stargate that we talked about in the Patreon video, but also with John Carter, that he goes to different planets and they are sort of the archaeological site for him, in a sense.
John Carter on Mars, yeah. And he is very much a retro adventure hero, even though that was written probably like, I don't know, maybe 100 years ago almost. I'm not sure, that was written a long time ago. He was a character from the Civil War, and he's going and doing all this like adventuring over in Mars and all this kind of stuff. And he is again the representative of North America, the United States of America, being, an imperial kind of character, going off and dealing with like native peoples of another civilization, or, just the people of another civilization, being the representative of our culture, of us, going out there and adventuring and exploring, which is exactly what a retro adventure hero does. Classic. I love that kind of stuff.
I keep on thinking about the ways in that it's different than an action hero, right? Like, and I think the difference that I keep coming back to is that the end game is the MacGuffin or exploring an unknown place, right? There's something curious about the end goal, breaking new ground, whatever. Whereas if you take an action movie like, say, Predator, for instance, that should almost have the makings of like an action adventure movie. And I mean, you technically could say it is, but I think the defining difference is that they're not there to retrieve anything. Like, there are aliens involved, but those aliens being involved is a matter of the character's survival. They don't have anything to do with what they're trying to gain at the end. Like, the movie doesn't even say why they're over there. I think
I think it was like
I can't even remember where they are.
South America. They were after terrorists or something. From what I remember, it was really
vague. Right. Yeah, and because they didn't need to focus on why the characters were there for in this distant, very foreign seeming land to the audience. What mattered in the end was survival. Survival was the MacGuffin. So I think that's a very, maybe if we're drawing definitions, that might kind of be the boundary line, I wonder.
Yeah.
Because Indiana Jones is different than Dutch, say, for instance, in that movie, very much in what they're trying to accomplish, I think.
Yeah, true. And say, like the world in Indiana Jones or the Adventure Hero world, the world is more alive and it's more built out. Because in an action film, the world isn't that important so much. You're not really exploring. It's just a background for the character to trample through. I think there is crossover with the retro heroes and adventure heroes. There's crossover, but yeah,
oh, definitely.
The world is a bigger part, and MacGuffins in retro adventure heroes to action. I think action stories
in the early 90s or so, we get a lot more of that kind of mixing, right? Like, say, with movies like Independence Day or like all of the disaster movies that came out, the heroes a lot of times in that, tend to be like, bookish or scientisty guys, even with like Jurassic Park, right? Where something I have to think about this a little bit. But I feel like the early 90s, which I think we can start to kind of consider retro, I hate to say.
Yes, 30 years ago. Almost.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I feel like the disaster movies in the early 90s were kind of trying to mix the two a little bit. Like, there's the survival, right, is a big part of what they have to do, of what the characters have to do. But at the same time, there's this element of like awe, right, at like whatever catastrophe is happening, the aliens or asteroids or whatever the fuck it is. So I think that's when they kind of meld a little bit, if that makes sense. I don't know. I might be just talking out of my ass, but
yeah, it could do. The 90s was a time when the blockbuster film had stalled, and they were trying to find a way to make them popular again with like Independence Day. That was like a weird one. And what was that other one? The Stargate was just like, oh my god, this is retro in style. What the hell are they doing? But it worked.
Yeah, there was a bunch. Yeah.
Yeah, disaster films was like an old 70s trope. And suddenly we're back to disaster films, and I thought, Armageddon, the volcano, Dante's Peak,
yeah, yeah. That one scene in Dante's Peak where like the grandma or whatever starts getting boiled alive in the lake really got to me for a long time. We're not talking about that. I'm gonna try not to get sideswept into trauma talk about movies. So.
Well, let's see. In the 90s was when Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, came out.
Yeah.
And that created that was amazing because, although people go, oh, I have boobs, that created a whole new franchise. That created a new character in the retro adventure hero pantheon. And now she is firmly established there. She didn't exist before that. And suddenly, Lara Croft, da-da, born from the head of Zeus, whatever. There she is.
Well, she's arguably also, I think, one of the very first characters of her kind, because I mean, you were getting some action female leads by then, but this we didn't really have any yet who went out and sought like action and adventure, who actively went out and, put themselves in danger. A lot of the action heroines and stuff, they were either like born into a dangerous world, or like, fate conspired against them, and they're always kind of on their back foot having to defend themselves against the dangers of the situation they're in. But Lara Croft, she, I think, is, I mean, as far as I can think of, the first of her kind, in that she pursued the danger when she doesn't have to, you know?
Yeah, well, she was an active hero as opposed to the more passive ones. And like she is a more traditional kind of retro adventure hero, in that she goes and seeks it out and makes it happen. So she is fantastic in that regard. I loved that she was incredibly competent too. So she broke the mold of that stuff. I think there's this modern version where they've kind of rebooted her, like doing this crap origin stuff that's so popular these days, and they've turned her into like a vulnerable character who uses bows and arrows, and like is basically, if we're going to get right down to it, is the traditional idea of a female adventure hero, the one that is passive and is a victim and fighting back, and it's just boring to me because it's been done so many times before. So what we had was something that was more unique and more interesting, where it was an actual competent character, because you don't have to start out with a character learning to be competent. Characters like Indiana Jones isn't a character that learns to use a whip and a pistol. He just knows because he's an adventure hero. That's how it works.
Yeah, and some of the only times that we see like flashbacks to his childhood are things that really impact him as a character significantly, like when his father gets involved, and then we see the flashback to the what happened on the train and stuff, and that even back then he was trying to grab shit and was getting chased by bad guys. I forget who the bad guys were in that particular scene, but and then he finally comes home to his father, this very learned man who has him stop and count in ancient Greek, I think, before he can speak. So I mean, that's super revealing, right, about this character that we're already so interested in.
Exactly. The character has lots of interesting depth and competence and ability and history. But that's an interesting thing. These characters have there can be a lot to them, but they're very rarely have too much of a vulnerable side, in that they're competent. That's one of the traits of a retro adventure hero. They have competence. It's just what they tend to do. I mean, I suppose like a character like MacGyver. I know Tance quite likes MacGyver. He's not a retro adventure hero, but I think that's where he comes from in his style and his abilities and what he does, because he does do some adventuring to different places, but he has that competence and intelligence, and he's a very he's like a doctor. He's a very qualified kind of character, like these adventure heroes usually tend to be. They don't tend to be like some like a dock worker who just decides to go out and do some adventuring. They tend to go to different places because they're like explorers and things like that. That's what tends to send them off. Like they're a military officer, someone who's competent, qualified, knows what's what.
Yeah, or otherwise they have a specific motivation for going. They don't seek out the adventuring just for adventure's sake, at least not usually, or they would perhaps up until a point, but they wouldn't actually go right deep in the weeds of it without some specific motivation. Like usually Indiana Jones, for example, he doesn't. I mean, except for the flashbacks, he has reasons for going after a specific artifact, rather than oh, gung ho. Let's just go find something because we want to go find something. So yeah.
Yeah, there are reasons, like Lara Croft, there's very specific reasons that she's going to find the things, all tortured kind of story reasons that she wants to find the stuff. But yeah, there are. They're fun characters. Like, you know what drove me to like them more than anything else? It's the history and all that kind of stuff, and I like retro stuff because when I was little, I was reading the Boys' Own adventure stories, which were these an old style adventure kind of books of short stories and stuff aimed at children of empire. Basically, these were aimed at kids in the 1920s, 1930s, this kind of stories. And that's how you'd read about foreign places. You'd read them in these boys' own adventure stories, and there's girls' own adventure stories too. And so there's that kind of retro stuff in them, but there's also the look of the characters, which appeals to me. These people wearing these khaki trousers or jodhpurs and stuff, and fedora hats and pith helmets and white billowy shirts and like bandanas around their necks, brown leather. It just looks so freaking cool. And so those kind of things appeal to me, and that's like the unified look of many adventure heroes, even more modern ones like Lara Croft has that kind of look. Dirk Pitt, Matthew
the
McConaughey,
straps and stuff.
The straps, yes. Matthew McConaughey's character in Sahara. That's even though that's set in the modern day, he still has that the look. Holsters, a pistol on your side, hidden knives or a big machete, something like that. So actually, if we're talking about like reverse of it. There is a kind of a reverse of the character with Crocodile Dundee, which is a very stupid, silly Australian film. And he is, still in a Commonwealth country. Still, he's an Australian character going out into the wild world. But it is reversed in that even though he's from Australia, Australia is treated like the exotic place. And he is a representative of the exotic place, adventuring out into the sophisticated United States. Going into that world, and he's a fish out of water. So it's a weird kind of reversal. So he's a retro adventure hero from the barbarian place, going to the high culture civilization. So that's a weird way of looking at that. I've never really thought about that, but that is a reversed adventure hero, and he does have the look as well. And
it informed our perception of Australians ever since.
Yes, gave you a very accurate view of all Australians, exactly. Hiding my hat with the crocodile teeth around it, and a crocodile necklace. We wear them at all times underneath our shirts. Very important cultural artifact to us. Has so much meaning. Yeah. That is an interesting way of looking at that kind of stuff. So what are you guys, you must have favourite retro adventure heroes. I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but you could talk about one I've already named. Indiana or whatever.
I used to be like a huge Indiana Jones fan. basically, I like the adventure, but I also like the character because he wasn't completely straight laced, but he was straight laced enough uh, to trust his not so kosher decisions in a sense, and so I really liked that. Of course, he was like such a uh, uh, anti-Nazi character as well, so that always is a bonus with me.
Hmm.
And I was such a fangirl, like in my late high school years, that I uh, went out of my way to go find an authentic fedora hat, like the one he wore. And I found like the closest approximation, and when I did, and it had the actual color back then,
Mhm.
I wore it everywhere. And when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere. I wore it at school. I wore it uh, out when I went, and I basically was the girl in the hat because nobody got it that I wore the hat because I liked Indiana Jones. They thought I was, you know, um, making a fashion statement of some sort. Uh, so yeah, that went on for like a couple of years, um, and that's how I have an Indiana Jones hat. Yes.
That's very
Yeah.
cool. You got an item of fashion out of it. Win-win. What about you, Pitsy? You're a bit of an adventure hero yourself. I mean, you have knowledge of ancient Greek history, and you're an archaeologist, and you've travelled the world. You've
I
been
do
on
have
a
several
ship.
mummies' curses.
Several mummies curses. You've crewed a ship. You've done
Uh,
all sorts of things.
that makes it very ironic that I don't have a favorite one. I don't think. It just, huh?
You know too much
I've got
about
nothing
them.
against the genre. It's not one that I've gotten that much into. I think I have a little bit better knowledge of, um, like more the action movie kind of thing, which is why I kind of tried to shamble that in there earlier and then retreated. Um, yeah, I don't have a favorite one, I don't think.
So for a lot of people, like the retro adventurers, like it's more escapist, something to that they would
Yeah.
want to go for. Whereas for you, so many aspects of the adventure hero trope are stuff that you actually do in your real life, so or have
Oh,
done.
thanks. One time I did. I'd like to. Again, I haven't stolen any artifacts, and that's one good thing in my favor. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say. I
Don't
mean, I do
offend the
like
natives.
a lot of them. There's just yeah. But yeah.
I was just thinking, with Chance's mention of the Indiana Jones hat, there's many things I've bought because I like the adventure hero trope. You know, I've got this pith helmet, the spike on the top.
Yeah.
I've got like jodhpurs in the proper style. They started out as American World War One style military trousers. Gaiters, which are leather kind of leg things that these kind of people would wear, like bandoliers and all this kind of stuff. You know, they just fit with that adventure hero kind of thing. So I collect them. But I wore the Captain America World War II jacket, which from the film Captain America: The First Avenger, and he in the first part of that film, it's an action film, but in the first part of the film there is kind of the retro adventure hero kind of thing because he's like he's going, you know, he's in the United. He's going to fight the Germans and fight Nazis and all this kind of stuff, and it just has that feel. And he wears a brown leather jacket. And I got the jacket from the film. I got two versions of the jacket. And I wear it everywhere. I have done for years. And everyone compliments me on it because it's a 1930s kind of cut. And it's an unusual looking jacket. It doesn't look like something from a movie. It just looks like a 1930s motorcycle dispatch rider jacket. Because that's what it actually is. And looks cool. So dressing like an adventure hero is a style kind of statement to it.
You look like somebody who's always ready for a safari.
I have this friend, Radu. He's based. Well, he came from Romania originally, Radu, but he has sort of based his life on the adventure hero trope. Even though he's from Romania, very much so. He's like the real life version of the adventure hero in all its glory. It's all its like negative and positive glory. And when I mean real life, I mean like real. He will go on safaris and he will hunt animals. He'll go. He works as a photographer of like endangered species and things. So he's been to all parts of Africa and all the weird little islands in the Pacific. He's been to them and he's camped for days in the mud to get the perfect photo of this unusual endangered species that no one has captured since it was discovered. Like a while ago, I saw these fantastic photos online of these really bizarre creatures, and I shared them. And he actually made a comment on my Facebook feed saying, "Yeah, I took a photo. Those were my photos 20 years ago, and no one had taken photos since of that particular creatures. These were my photos that I, happened to get. And the reason I found them was because, these were the only photos of this creature online that he had actually taken. So he is the real life version, but he does sort of dress like those characters as well. So he'll have like khaki shirts and hats and straps and things, and he's talked to the last surviving cannibals in Fiji. He is a real life version with all the good and bad that it has. So we must acknowledge, the bad and the good of these characters. They aren't like pure positive characters. They do have that imperialist, colonialist legacy, very much so, because that's the culture what they came from. They're not advocates of that lifestyle or of that philosophy. They're just remnants of it. And I think the later versions do try and change that a bit. No, they don't change that. They try and update it a bit for our world, which is a good thing. They're not just because we use them and they come from that colonial background doesn't mean they will always be representative and advocates of it. We do mold them and change them to try and fit with our more considered view of the world, I think, which is a very important thing to do, because it would be horrible to have those characters still around and still keep that kind of white supremacist view that is part of colonialism, which they did come from that, but they don't own it, which is good. I mean, you don't see that with Indiana Jones, especially as that character develops from how he was in Raiders of the Lost Ark and onwards. You do see it a bit with Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think, in that the native people there are the scared kind of servants who are helping him dig or whatever, but he's not really setting himself apart as superior to them. So
there's also and one of the unfortunate things about Indiana Jones, I do love it as a series, but archaeologists always kind of shun it, and because the character is a remnant from a very dark past in archaeology that archaeology has tried to move past, and that is going and taking artifacts from a place without that place's permission. For instance, like in the Temple of Doom and stuff like that, where he takes the artifact and he starts running, and he's these unnamed savages are throwing things at him. That's not his artifact to take. He doesn't need to take it. So that's the kind of thing that archaeologists have umbrage with Indiana Jones, and because that's a way that he connects to that colonial kind of past where it doesn't matter who these people are, just go in and take it and bring it back for the museum.
It belongs in a museum.
So, yeah.
It doesn't belong in its cultural context. There is no cultural context. It's our cultural context. It's only ours. So we can look at it and examine it. Because our culture is the only one that exists. Yeah, that is very much.
For anyone who can't tell, he's being sarcastic.
Yes, not being serious. Yeah, that is very much that colonialist idea. I mean, not unfortunately, it was honest for that character because that was a pastiche of those retro adventure heroes, the early version of that character, very much so. So it was honest for that character to do that. And yeah, it is negative and bad. But yeah, that's how people felt in the 1930s, where that character is based. I think so. When did that
but
change?
Also in the time.
Oh, go on. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Sorry. It started to change back. Oh, I have to remember my archaeological theory. Oh, which I'm not great with, but the older parts of it. But back, there were inklings of discussion back in the 50s, and then it really started to change more back in the 70s, and then with like modernity and stuff like that, there became different perspectives to talk about instead of like, oh, here is a gold bracelet, let's look at it because it's shiny and it's old. It became more of a what can we say about the cultures that this came from? It's when context really started to matter, and like, different perspectives and different cultures and stuff like that. Like, were there different kinds of classes? If so, was there like a ruling class and a working class? Were there, what were different genders in this society, like that kind of thing. So that's when it kind of became broader. So I would.
So you look at it from the inside.
I'd have to say around the 70s.
Okay.
Yeah. Edict versus. I can't remember the phrasing now, but yeah, that's it.
So in the 1930s, this is a very honest portrayal of how they would have behaved towards artifacts and stuff like that. They still very much had that imperialist kind of view. I mean, America was particularly strong in that. Yeah, they had so the film. What was it? The Mummy one? Or was it just called The Mummy? The Brendan Fraser one.
Yeah.
Yeah, The Mummy. So in that particular one, you have an American character and this English woman and English man together, brother and sister. And there's a mummy curse and all that kind of bullshit. But it's a great fun kind of romp. But this is back in the 19th century. America was particularly... Like, there would be American tourists all over Egypt. Like, there's photos of American tourists, like, on top of the Great Pyramids of Giza and all over the Sphinx and stuff. And in the United States, they had mummies that they would grind up as medicine powder and they'd snort it and do all sorts of things. It was incredible.
To be rich.
But yeah, that was like a really, really common thing. There was so many mummies dug up. And in the United States, like in traveling sideshows, just incredibly, the archaeological damage must be like incredible. But yeah,
absolutely,
it's a good connection to that film.
And diggers, a lot of times they would hire local people to dig, which in theory sounds great, but there weren't good practices necessarily in terms of managing people or paying them what they're owed. But that was the way that is the way things have been for a long time. So, not just with archaeology, but that was also anyway. This is a different kind of cast, but
well, it's incredibly interesting. Yeah, so there are the real life perspective on the adventure heroes and where this stuff came from. We've only got 5 minutes left for this until Google kicks us in the crotch. But so we can dive in a few things. There's a lot of these adventure stories are set in South America for some reason, and I suppose that's because of the lost civilization idea, because there's a hell of a lot of abandoned ruins down there where civilizations had been. I mean, obviously the Spanish kicked people out of active civilization and caused a lot of the ruins, but there were a lot of abandoned cities all throughout South America that happened way before the Spanish even came. That was because there was wars and disease and famine and economic issues and all kind of reasons. Like archaeologists have found all kinds of weird reasons why these civilization like cities were abandoned, but that was fodder for so many adventure hero stories because there's ideas like the City of Gold, the Lost City of Gold, but there's other things like I think that was a story of Edgar Rice Burroughs' story about some matriarchal kingdom in South America. I know, of course, there's the Ace Kincaid, my character Ace Kincaid, based on, I think, G. Kincaid, a character who was meant to have found an ancient lost city in the Grand Canyon in a cave. Sort of based on the South American characters, even though the Grand Canyon is not in South America or Central America. But yeah, there are... South America is great fodder for that because there's so many, like these ruins of these civilizations, which were, say you go to the Middle East, you find ruins of lost civilizations, but they're 3,000 years old, 2,000 years old or something. Whereas these ones in South America are 500 years old, or 400, or maybe 1,000 years old. So they're nowhere near as old. Some of them are, but a lot of them are a lot younger. So their ruins are better preserved and more interesting, and wider in scope, and they're not totally underneath desert sands. These things are in the jungle, and you can find them whole there. So there's a whole different kind of thing. Sorry, Pete, were you going to say something?
well, it's also a place that where you can set a story, and for instance, if we were going to have an adventure story and we set it somewhere in Asia, people over here, people would generally tend to think it was probably going to be a Vietnam War story or something like that. So South America is a place where you could potentially set a story, and it doesn't necessarily have any modern ties to any turbulent places. Then again, there was one in Indiana Jones took place in the Middle East, so I don't know, but
it did, didn't it? One in India, one in Jerusalem, and one in South America. Maybe the Holy Grail one's also in the Middle East. I'm not sure. Anyway, it looks like Google is going to kick us now. So thank you very much for listening to the Retro Adventure Hero story, and please tell us about your favorite Retro Adventure Heroes, because I love them. I just do. So stylish, so cool. So
bye.
Bye. Apart from the colonial
Bye.
stuff that we do acknowledge. Okay.